All right, guys, welcome to the new podcast episode of Obu. I'm here again with Yonas and Kai, and of course, I'm Hrvoje. And today we'll be covering, I think, the most exciting set of reveals we have had in a while. These anniversary sets are always like introducing something new and potential like game breaking into the game, and I believe you guys know where I'm heading with this. We got the Roger, the 7K leader, as well as some other. Do you guys have any favorites? Any you want to tackle first?
Many people are here for Roger, but there's a lot of cards to talk about him, so maybe we hold on to him for a little bit. And I think we also, Roger seems to be kind of taking center stage, but there are the three brother leaders, so maybe we should talk about those. Maybe starting with Red Green Luffy, even though we did talk about it a little bit in the past, just to sort of recap and with some of the new knowledge that we have, some additional thoughts on that later. Thank you.
Yeah, let's start with the first lead that was spoiled during PRB spoilers. The red-green Luffy leader. It's a red-green 4-life leader with 5k power. It's Straw Hat Crew and Supernova, and it's Dawn X1 on opponent's attack. If your total active Dawn is 5 or less, you may rest any number of those Dawn. For each Dawn rested this way, give your leader or up to one of your Straw Hat Crew type characters plus 2k power for this battle. Some notable things before we kind of talk about how we feel about the card is it doesn't seem like it's once per turn, so you can use this more than once. Importantly, I think Kai, you mentioned this previously. This card is not a protect 8-cost kid, right? It only protects Straw Hat 2 type characters, unfortunately. But the fact that we get to turn Dawn into effectively 2k counter, which is effectively just free card advantage every turn, feels really powerful. I'm not entirely sure if the red-green base can use it particularly well, but on its face, this leader ability seems very, very strong. What are your thoughts on this, Hrvoje?
Yeah, I'm thinking like free card value is good. Like when you think about what this translates to, is you effectively pay 1 Dawn to draw 2k. For your leader or Straw Hat characters only does make it a bit more limited, but red and green has been like the Straw Hat paradise since the game started. Only in like OP13 did Straw Hat as a theme shift more into purple. So I'm thinking like this is just really good. Like you can print out Dawn and counter out like so many swings for free, both into life and into your board. So that makes me think this deck will want to play aggressive. And if there is stuff that will make this deck weak at any point in like any meta, of course I'm assuming a lot of stuff here, but this would be the classic type of deck that falls to removal, where like the leader ability is great for generating like invisible card advantage, but then it needs to stick a board to actually utilize that. But yeah, I'm thinking like this on paper looks insane, and I can see myself being proven wrong depending on how difficult it is to have a Dawn attached and Dawn open. But Luffy, it's a supernova, right? So he can run Cavendish. So yeah, my impressions of it are pretty good, but in a kind of boring way. So let's put it that way.
Well, not as boring as Green Zoro, though. I think, though, with some of these new leaders, a lot of our rating on them will change based on some of the cards, and at least for the 5 out of 6 leaders that have been revealed at this point, we have seen some of the SRs, so we'll definitely talk about those kind of as we talk about these leaders. But my opinion on this leader, I'm still very unsure about how I feel because of the point that Hrvoje just pointed out, in that it is very difficult for a traditional deck to attach a Dong to your leader and have Dong left over if you're trying to play for board, essentially. And this sort of effect that doesn't affect the board on its own and is just purely defensive, you do want to already have an established board before you use the attack. So being able to use Cavendish is going to be very nice. Paying 1 for a plus 2k generally has felt a little bit heavy, but having that for free does sort of offset that cost. I definitely think that, at least in my head, the way that you'd probably want to play this deck would be to, play on curve in the early game, not really use your leader effect until you get to something like Tendong, where you play large characters, and then you just sit back every turn, kind of like how you would with other sorts of control decks, where you play like 1 or 2 blockers and leave up a couple of Dong for events, or in this case, your leader effect.
You said you were most excited about this leader.
Yeah, I think the leader is just very powerful in terms of card economy. Also, recently in OP12, they've kind of increased the number of ways to protect your green characters between like the new Koshiro. Now Ovo had 3-cost Tashiki for a while. So green characters tend to stick a little bit more than they used to. So I'm not really as worried about this type of deck, like making sure that your characters can stick for longer periods of time. I just really hope that this deck can kind of apply a little bit more pressure than the tools that we kind of have currently. That as it is right now, it's a little bit too slow compared to other decks like Rayleigh or other stuff like that. But I think this can still be a very powerful combination of cards, and maybe even the 4-cost Luffy from OP12 can go into a deck like this and just be a very powerful aggressive tool, kind of doing like the aggro like mixture of events plus big character type deal.
I mean, like on paper, the effect is really crazy. I'm sure. It's just, at least in my opinion, and we're going to probably see this more as we talk about the other decks. Basically, all of the other leaders are in a way 6k base, and this is basically the only one that's 5k base for the entire time. And so that plus 2k is kind of only plus 1k that does cost you 2, because one dong needs to be on your leader. So the fact that it's just a 5000 power 4 life leader, just the standard stat line, makes it a little bit weak in my opinion in that regard. But I definitely think that, I mean, it's Luffy, so they're going to definitely give it a ton of support. And Straw Hat and Straw Hat Pirates in red and green have already been very powerful. So I'd be surprised if the deck isn't viable. I'm just currently a little bit skeptical with the current cards that we've seen.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to make predictions on decks that would lean both aggro and control, because when you see something that's very, very like efficient in terms of card economy, it makes you lean more towards control. But this is also like really good for board defense, so maybe you can just go full on aggro, spend like Dawn to develop board, and then defend it with like invisible 2Ks. It's probably the best color combination for the animal package. And there's also like the old film package. There's a lot of stuff to try out, because Straw has just had a wealth of red and green support. But yeah, remember guys, last time when the red deck was like aggro, we did underestimate it. So
no one ever thought really it would be that good.
It made for a very good thumbnail and title, though. So it worked out in the end. Yeah, I think it's hard to sort of talk more about this leader without talking about some of the sport. So I think that at the very least, let's first talk about a card that we have already seen in the Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, because now the effect makes a little bit more sense. It's a 1-cost 1000 2k counter, and activate main. Give one of your leaders or characters an active dong and trash this character. Give one of the opponent's characters minus 3000 power for the turn. This card, at the time, we were talking about how the effect is very good on paper. It may be a strict upgrade to Makino, but it technically does cost 2, because you have to pay 1 for the card and pay 1 to attach a dong. And this was a sort of bottleneck that we were a bit afraid of, but it makes sense now, given that we've now seen the 3 Ace, Sub, and Luffy leaders, which all are red and all have an effect that need a dong attached.
To be honest, I don't really think it does anything special in the red-green Luffy deck. I'm not entirely sure if the deck's really leaning a lot more towards the control aspect. I could see this card being very convenient to kind of help on like these like middling turns to make sure you can deal with your opponent's rested characters while also continue being proactive. But this card doesn't feel like it does that much better than like anything else, and I'm not entirely sure if this card is searchable by the cards that search for exactly Luffy. I assume not, but I'm curious about the technical ruling on that as well.
Yeah, I don't think that the card is searchable off of those, because this is Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, not Ace or Sabo or Luffy.
Got it.
yeah, for me, I think like the problem is when you look at 2Ks in what this deck is going to look like, your leader is already like supposed to provide those free 2Ks at some point anyway. So the 2Ks themselves, you shouldn't need too many of them. And also the ones you need, they have to have some like other very useful purpose in gameplay, like preferably being searchable, but also possible engine pieces with like relevant effects. I was just checking if the one was baby 5, she can thresh herself to set 2 Dawn active end of turn. Like that's something cute that might matter, just because it turns like 1 2K in hand into 2 2Ks effectively. And I'm sure there's many other examples, but mainly if we're looking at animal package, you will want the hiking bear, maybe the Duck Squadron. It feels very what's the word for it? Like pigeonholed into this board controlish playstyle that the deck might not need from a 2K cannot even search when it's not supposed to have a 2K problem by design. So for Red Green Luffy at least, I'm not too hyped for it.
Yeah, I think I'm basically of the same opinion. But worth mentioning, and there are other leaders that I do think that it interacts with a little bit better. The other SR, though, that is more direct Red Green Luffy support is the green 10 cost Shanks. This card is a 10 cost 12,000 and on play restand all of your Dong. Then you can't play cards for the rest of your turn. Importantly, there was some confusion online about if this means that you can still play events, and I believe that you can't. We don't have an official ruling on this, so we may end up being wrong. The wording on Vegapunk was like you can't play cards to board in the way that the Japanese was worded. So I believe that at least for this card, it means that you just can't play any cards after it's played.
But only for your turn. You can still use counter events on your opponent's turn, right?
Yeah. Yes, so you can, for example, attach 1 dong to your leader and leave up 5 dong. So, you do, by playing this, get an immediate 10,000 counter. What do you think about this card in general, not just in Red Green Luffy, but in other sorts of decks, Hrvoje?
Oh, well, the design of this card, the fact that you're not able to like further develop, and that it doesn't really have a purpose beyond being a really big body you put down on the board, it makes me think that decks that want to play this are also decks that like naturally lean aggressively. So yeah, I don't know. Aggressive green decks are not too common, or like they exist, but as hybrids of other stuff. Like, could Uta run this? I guess this would be a good fit in Uta. Is it film?
It is film.
It is.
Yeah.
Also, she can like get the leader attached, get the search. Oh, but you cannot play I'm Invincibles. So maybe it's not that good. But yeah, I'm just thinking this is a card that's very aggro leaning because all it does is like establish a big body, but still lets you have all the Dawn to swing with. Which, in Bonney, it doesn't sound that appealing compared to all the lockdown options, or even straight removal like the 9-cost Shanks. But especially in Red Green Luffy, it also seems like you just use a bunch of Dawn and leave as many counters as you need. The only concern is it might be slow. Like 10 costs in this meta, it takes a while to get there, and that's why it's probably just designed for Red Green Luffy who can stall with the leader ability.
I actually think this card is bad, funnily enough. As much as I really want this card to be good, I have the issue that when you establish this card, either there's kind of two main scenarios. One, you're too far behind that you're hoping this card's going to kind of help you, but all you really can do is just swing big with your leader or one other character. Or you're far enough ahead where like you establishing this and then using your other characters you already established to apply a lot of pressure is going to be very good. But I'm not entirely sure if the additional this 12k body is really the thing that's kind of tilting the favor or the game in your favor. So I think it's just like a card that feels really fun to establish, but I don't think it's going to actually be the card that wins a lot of games, it seems like.
That's actually a very good point, because I just thought when you started describing that, it's like when we were originally testing Lim without any top end, we were like, oh, but top end feels so good to play. But the situations which you end up winning are the ones where you don't, where you play without reliance on playing top end later. Like you already win the board or establish a board, and then you don't need the top end. But the games where you are losing the board is because you had this brick without counter in hand that does nothing for the first 5 turns of the game. So yeah, that's actually a great point.
Yeah, I thought that this would be my hot take. I think this card's really bad. Like, the thing is, like, what it says is insane, and like people on Twitter think it's insane. Do you even want a 0-cost 12,000 power character on 10 dong if you're not establishing other things that can actually immediately affect the board or immediately, spread out your board, make blockers or something? The thing is, like, the 12,000 body doesn't hit until the next turn, and if you're attaching all your dong onto your characters, you're probably trying to make a situation that you finish the game next turn with the Shanks. But I think the timing is just really awkward for this card. Making all of your dong active currently is only beneficial to Red Green Luffy, and granted for him, it is like a significant amount of counter, but I just don't feel like you really need a it's not even free, like a good 12,000 body, because it feels just so slow when you'd rather just be playing out your board, making it bigger, or leaving up dong in different ways. I think it just doesn't do enough, and the limitation of not being able to play cards is very significant for me, which would change if you can use events, but we'll have to see.
Those are all the supers that got revealed for red and green, right? If I get to pick, I dress for the occasion. I really like red Black Sabo on paper. I believe he says when you have one Don and you control an 8 cost or higher character, your leader and all your characters gain plus 1000 power. And static effect is when you have 4 more life, the leader has minus 1000. This matters because he's red and black, Dressrosa Revolutionary Army, but he has 5 life and 5000 base power. So what this means in practice is he's like red purple kid. He starts out weaker, and he needs to take those first few lives very aggressively, either through like opponent's combat or like playing cards like the Tuko Sanji, to even like sort of begin establishing his presence in the game. He kind of turns into a variant of the starter 14 Black Luffy, where if you attach the Dawn, you start reaping benefits from having 8 costs on board. But of course, you have the dual color access. You don't have the Straw Hat typing, but you also buff your entire board, which is where I see most of the potential of the card, of the leader. Because buffing your leader alone to 6000, it's been done before. Like every deck in the meta does it now. It's not that cool. But actually buffing your board and key pieces, if the deck goes like more black removal engine type of stuff, I can see that being relevant. But what were your guys' impression? See, let's start with you, Kai.
Yeah, I think there's two different ways that this leader can build the deck. So I think that it'll largely come down to how people decide to build it. I do think that you can either play the very slow Dressrosa variant. We also have some very nice cards like Hakke from OP12, which is a 4-cost 5000 blocker, which if your leader's Revolutionary Army gains plus 4000 or gains plus 4 cost, and on KO, KO's a base 4 cost or less from the opponent. So it's basically Lucky Roo, but for Revolutionary Army, and it's an 8 cost, so it works really well with this, plus it's Revolutionary Dressrosa. But aside from those sorts of cards, I think that you do need to decide if you want to go towards Dressrosa or if you want to go towards Revolutionary Armies. And so those are two very opposite archetypes. Revolutionary Armies, a archetype that's historically, at the very least, very aggressive, and Dressrosa, a archetype that's very defensive. Currently, the cards that increase their cost on board are the Revolutionary Army cards from OP12, so I would imagine I would want to lean towards that at the current stage. I also think that the leader effect, if you sort of look at it with a different lenses on, it could be seen as a red Zoro but cool sort of leader effect, where it buffs up your entire board, but it buffs it up permanently. So I think that you can use it very aggressively, or if you use things like the Corrida Coliseum stage, you can hit into the board and generate value that way. Currently, at least from I haven't tested it all, but just from my initial thoughts looking at the cards, the Revolutionary Army version looked better to me. So I would imagine at the very least that right now it does want to play like fancy Red Zoro. I think that the leader effect is absolutely very powerful. It's just that once again, kind of like the Red Green Luffy, it does suffer a lot against removal.
A lot of similar points, especially with like how fragile a lot of these threats are. You do have access to the OP12 Dragon in terms of like resiliency, in terms of getting that extra card advantage back, which I think is a huge boon for this deck. I just didn't see a lot of the pros in terms of like late game, with the exception of like the 8-cost Dragon to get some extra value, the black one per se. I just don't really see a lot of what this deck's doing that's kind of exceptionally powerful compared to a lot of the other decks that kind of build bigger boards. Like if I got paired against like even Green Zoro, I just don't really see how my threats would line up particularly well. And even again, if blue purple continues to exist, obviously your threats kind of just get put out of the water. So I'm not entirely sure what the format will look like back then. Whether a mid-range deck like what Sabo will look like, I expect it to look like, will continue to exist. But the leader effect is quite powerful, and I really like this style effect of just like five life 5k leader that gets bigger over time. I haven't really kind of established a vision in terms of what I want the deck to look like.
Technically, I agree with that statement, because for me, most of the excitement comes from the fact that when I see this color combination, I do view all the ways that could be potentially built. I haven't tested it, but that's why it's so exciting. Because yeah, the Dressrosa and the Revo army are like two obvious options, but Navy has a lot of red plus black support thanks to Kobe, and you can still incorporate a lot of the existing like Dressrosa cards and the new ones, which we'll get to in a bit, to maybe get the leader ability online a little bit faster. When I think about it a bit more like comparatively, buffing up your characters is something that Red Green Smoker does. Like he has the Navy archetype in Red Green, and he puts those characters plus 1k. So in a sense, this is similar to that. It just has one more life and will be geared more towards removal just due to the nature of the colors involved. But yeah, most of my excitement comes from the fact that I will spend endless hours trying to make this deck work and hope it doesn't end up like Koala 2.
But I mean, speaking of Koala though, because both of the leader effects interact with you having an 8 cost on the board, I'm sure that means that we're going to be getting Koala support simultaneously. Whether or not it's going to be better than Sabo, I'm not sure. I definitely think that Sabo has the advantage of having. I mean, they're both Dressrosa Revolutionary Army, but I think that there's a lot of potential in a red-black Revolutionary Army leader than something like a black-yellow, because that just hasn't really been established quite yet. I do think that if we are kind of looking at this aggressive variant a little bit more, the old 8-cost dragon, I believe OP06 maybe, the red one that's an 8-cost 9,000 rush that attaches 2 dong to your leader or characters, means that you can very easily just hit out of nowhere if your leader is at 5,000 power base for 8 and 10 for 8 dong, which I think is very powerful while also buffing up your entire board. So I definitely think that there are some very powerful things that this leader is capable of doing. Works very well with some of these cards, and also the ability to buff up the power of the characters on your board also works well with the old Revolutionary Army characters that have conditions once you're at 7,000 power. Things like Karase, being able to reduce the opponent's power. Things like, I can't think of any of the other ones. Oh, the 5-cost Iwankofu and the 4-cost Iwankofu that play out other Revolutionary Armies, those don't have color locking on them, so you can play out whatever the new black, like 4-cost Revolutionary Army that increases its cost by 4, for example. Those there's some that exist right now, but I'm sure we're going to get more. I definitely think that red has the tools to spread out your board, and black has the tools to increase your costs currently. So if they can work really well together, I think you get your leader effect online very fast. I think that the leader is very interesting, but it's hard to really rank how powerful it may be.
Yeah, you could combine like through the Straw Hat engine, because I have my crew as a searchable 1-cost event that gives plus 3 costs. So you could play like the 5-cost Rush Luffy and then increase it to 8 and swing, and then try to double tap the value that way. But we did actually have one piece of Revolutionary Army support revealed already. It's like the new Secret Rare Sabo. So I'll just read it out quickly. He's a 6-cost 7k blocker in black, and he has activate main, give up to one of your characters plus 2 cost until the end of the opponent's next turn, and then give 1 rested Dawn to your leader. So quite clearly designed for this leader, though obviously can be used in Koala and other black options, because he just turns himself into 8-cost and immediately turns on the leader, effectively making himself an 8k blocker for 6 Dawn, which good value. He's going to be difficult to remove unless you're Green Zora. It's enough to push it over the top, not yet, but we just have to see.
Sure, actually, unless your Green Zoro is a pretty big asterisk. So that is something to consider. But yeah, I think that this card, on paper, because you attach a Dong and its activate main, so you can attach a Dong every single turn, at the very least, it's basically, once you get your leader effect online, a 5-cost 8,000 blocker. And then with your effect, it technically becomes 7-cost, or no, 8-cost, because it's 6-cost base. So, like, it's a very beefy blocker, and I think that that's going to be very good. It's also Dressrosa typing, so you can immediately attack with it. I think there's, like, pretty good stuff, yeah.
I do think that him being an 8k base when your opponent tries to attack into it as Green Zoro is a very difficult ask for Green Zoro to remove.
But he's 8 cost, so he can attack into it twice, right?
Oh yeah, it is base cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he cannot swing into the character twice. Okay.
He cannot, no.
Okay, that is a bit reassuring. He doesn't have that much on 7. But okay, to be fair, the main way you play around that leader ability is through small blockers to eat that first hit, because I don't think you're countering out if he goes like all in on the character, which he might very well do. But then again, you do have the synergy with the dragon where he just revives him, and now you have 2 big bodies.
It makes me sad you can't play the Robin and OP12 in this deck, but I understand why you can't.
Yeah, I'm just like keep on comparing it in my head to Red Purple Kid, and I'm thinking what makes Red Purple Kid not good. Well, he starts out weak, which is not where you want to be as an aggressive deck. He has this extra life, which is not given usually to dual color leaders, but then he cannot make use of it because his early game is so weak, and he doesn't have proper control tools. I'm thinking if this deck ends up being good, it has to be some variant of control that actually makes use of the extra resource and all the extra defense, because Kid is basically a cheese aggro deck where you try to like double swing for game with I'm forgetting the name of the sidekick.
It's a 5-cost killer, right? The purple one.
Oh yeah, killer. Yeah, the purple 5 cost. But if this goes the way of aggro, I have much lower expectations than if it goes the way of control.
There is one important card they printed in OP13. It's a random uncommon common. That's the Ivankov. It's a 2-cost 3K, 1K counter that's Rev Army. And it says if your character with a Rev Army trait would be KO'd by an opponent's effect, you may trash as a character instead. I'm not entirely sure if this card's good enough, but I thought that some protection effects might be good in a red-based Rev Army deck, especially if you're trying to go more mid-range or controlling. Is this card worth considering at all, or do you think this card's like a little bit too slow for a red deck?
I mean, I think that, the thing that we pointed out at the very beginning of this section was that this sort of effect would be sort of weak to removal. So just guaranteeing, even if for one turn that your 4 cost, that's 8 costs on board, for example, would stay on the board, I think is very solid. So I think that a card like this is pretty good. It's also very scary for Bello Betty because it means that my God Thread doesn't work. I'm not sure if it'll really fit into the sort of at least control variant, just because if you want to play control, then you maybe don't really want to play, like, you don't want to spend 2 costs to just not affect the board at all. It could be heavy in that aspect, just being a 1k counter, but I definitely see it having a place in a lot of at least Bella Betty and maybe the aggressive variant.
Yeah, that sounds a bit more appealing in Bella Betty because you often enough play down like the 2-cost koala turn on 2 or 3 done. For this time, I'm not sure. Like it's too far away to even decide if Revolutionary Army is the way to go.
I also think that he does work a little bit better with the Ace Sabo Luffy SR, just because being able to reduce the opponent's power and increase your own power makes it much easier to take the board via combat, and that's at least my favorite way to play the Dressrosa leaders, is to just hit them a lot with the 7-cost Luffy. This leader doesn't really have many ways to fill up your trash, so I'm not sure how well he'll be able to use that card, but I do think that there's some interesting options out there.
Yeah, it's kind of important to know that this set is on the precipice of like the rotation implementation in April. Like we'll have like 4 or 5 months, at least in the West, with this set before rotation enters. So I don't think a lot of the leaders were designed with like the old stuff in mind.
But on the flip side, I do think that we talked about it a little bit, but every 4th set that they've had in this game has generally been very, very absurd. Obviously, like set 1 was very, very powerful with like started at 8-cost Kid, a bunch of other stuff like that. Set 5 had Sakazuki, Lucci, Rebecca. Set 9 had like the Blackbeard, the Buggy, the Shank stuff, the Purple Luffy stuff. So I'm expecting a lot of these cards to be deceptively just okay, but very, very impactful in the current meta, or the meta that will exist in OP13 based on the trends.
At least historically, this has been the set that Worlds was played on, but I think with simultaneous release, that may end up changing. But we'll have to kind of see what they decide to do with that. But yeah, this is definitely the set to look at for sure.
I'll let you jump into your leader you probably want to play the most, Kai.
Yeah, okay, so let me just explain this, okay? 6,000 power, 3 life leader, okay? That's enough to be good for a lot of decks. But on the opponent's attack once per turn, you can trash a card from your hand and give your leader or character plus 2,000 power for the battle. This is basically what we were talking about with the red-green Luffy effect, where you can turn one dong into a 2k counter. Well, you can turn any character or any card in your hand into a 2k counter for free. Then, if you have a dong on your leader once per turn, when you take damage or one of your 6,000 or base 6,000 power or higher characters get KO'd, you can draw a card. So basically, this is a 6,000 power leader that solves the issues of being 3 life and can also solve the issue of having too many bricks. We haven't really seen, I think we've seen like one card for this leader. But the current card pool that already exists, whether it's the old cards like the 5-cost Ace, I think the Dream Luffy that on attack attaches a dong, the 6-cost Yamato, which hasn't quite found a place from EB02. There's just many cards that exist that are very powerful already for this deck, that I think that at least if we were to just take the leaders and use them in OP12, this would be the strongest leader.
Before I talk about what I think about this leader, the funny thing is I have to eat my words like immediately because I thought the PRB02 Marco was going to not really have a home because it didn't really have a great spot. And this is like the perfect home for that type of card. And I'm just like, all right, never mind. That card is going to be quite solid. But I do think this leader effect of always getting a 2k counter is super important for these 3 life 6k leaders, because one of the kind of the only way Blue Purple Luffy lost was just stumbling in the early game by not being able to counter out of an early 6 or 7, right? And now this deck gets to be as aggressive as it wants to be, plays a fairly or a decently greedy kind of curve out plan, and just be able to counter out of your opponent's or very early swings throughout the entire game. And despite the fact that it has to use the card or use cards repeatedly to use its leader effect, it now gets ways to generate that card advantage back with ways to get cards whenever your opponent gets dealt damage or when their stuff dies. So even when you're doing well or doing bad, you're still going to be netting cards a lot once per turn. So I think this leader effect is very, very good. I want to see if there's any other tools that this deck will get to kind of make this deck go over the top. Despite the fact that like OP02 Ace is a card that's been out for kind of like 3 years at this point, I think that card's still very, very powerful in this current metagame. But having a couple extra top-end pieces or like mid-game pieces will make this deck very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think the prospects are looking good. I just want to do 2 quick corrections because you only draw when you take damage, not when your opponent takes damage.
Oh, you take damage. Sorry, that's my bad.
Yeah.
I thought it was they take damage.
And also, it doesn't give plus 2k, it gives minus 2k to the opponent's attacker, right? There was the combo you could do with the old Ace where you combine... I'm forgetting the name of the first card. It was like Crossfire Red Hawk or something. This is like the mini version of that where you turn any card into that. I'm not sure if it was Crossfire or the something Fiery Doll. I think it was Crossfire. And yeah, you do have this potential to do like what Shanks did against Doffy with Red Hawk, but at a bigger scale. So I think that card might, until it gets rotated out, potentially find a home here. But base level, the ability looks strong. The skill, what was what I'm trying to use? The potential for skill also seems to be there just because of optimizing how you're going to expose your characters, how you're going to defend, and how you're going to take damage to actually maximize the value of all the card draws you want to get. Because once again, you do also have to have the Dawn attached. So you don't want to take that damage too carelessly in the early game to get the benefit. And then yeah, Whitebeard Pirates had some of the most absurd cards throughout game's history printed, but they were always gated by the fact they were Whitebeard Pirates, and there was not that many leaders that you could put them in that were like strong to begin with. Like 7-cost Ace from way back in the OPO2. I think this card is still going to rock the boat whenever it has its chance to be played. I think this will be a potential use case because you can always discard the bricks. Like even Flame Emperor might have a new home here, even though I think it's a lot worse than it was back in the day. And this is probably a guarantee we are never getting Moby Dick unbanned. But there's a whole like bunch of other relevant Whitebeard Pirates cards which never saw play in the leaders we expected them maybe to. Because Marco never used like the Atmos to bounce, whereas this will probably run a lot more Whitebeard Pirates cards and abuse that tempo advantage to just, go complete all in. It still has the Jozu, the double searchers now. I saw some friends at locals test this, and it looked pretty good, but they also didn't like run very optimized lists. It still has all the insane top end options like the old Newgate, the old blue Newgate, and the one we'll get to covering soon. I think Ace's base power level may be looking like the strongest option, but he will require more skill to pull it out than the other leaders.
At least I've realized when just trying to kind of think about this leader that deck building already, I think this kind of applies to Sabo as well, is insanely difficult because there's already so many cards that work really well with it. But maybe Bandai has something else in mind because the SR that they showed us is very much not an aggressive card. The SR that was shown was the 10 cost Edward Newgate, who is a 4 Emperor and Whitebeard Pirates type, 10 cost 12,000 blocker, and on play, draw 2 cards and trash 1 card. Then give your leader and character 2 dong each, or one of your characters 2 dong each. A bit of an interesting and new effect, kind of leaning into a more aggressive style, being able to attach dong while also being able to put up a very large blocker. What do you think about this, Yonas?
I thought this card wouldn't make sense in Ace personally. I think this card on paper seems like it lines up pretty well with what the Ace deck does because you want to make sure you have done in your leader. Having this really obnoxious blocker would be super nice. But the way I'm imagining the Ace deck will work is much more aggressive oriented to the point that I just don't really think that this Newgate really fits in with the curve that I'm envisioning the deck will have. I'm thinking like a lot more aggressive pieces, playing the blocker Vista, like the 1-cost blocker Vista from the Ace and Newgate starter deck, is being like a lot more like 5, 6, 7, 8s in terms of the top end that we're playing. So on its face, I'm not a huge fan of this card in the deck, but for the decks that really want to use the 9-cost event from the Ace and Whitebeard deck, the one that puts in Newgates, I forget the name of the card.
8 cost.
It's 8 cost.
I'm Whitebeard or whatever it's called in English.
Yeah. I feel like this card is a much better card for that deck, just because it's a much better defensive option than the previous 10-cost blue Newgate. So personally, I think this card is just kind of for a different style of deck, but if the Ace deck ends up being a little bit more controlling than I thought, then I could see this card becoming like a really powerful tool in that deck as well, or this deck as well.
And just to have the effect of the card that we just mentioned, because it's technically not out in the West yet, and it is a sort of interesting effect. It is an 8-cost event. I don't know what it's called in English, but if I were to directly translate what it says in Japanese, it says, I'm Whitebeard, which I don't think is how he said it in the manga. But on main, if your leader is Whitebeard Pirates, then you can play a Edward Newgate from your hand. Then you have the choice to take the top or bottom life to your hand, and if you do so, you gain plus 2,000 power to your leader until the end of the opponent's next turn. I still haven't heard your thoughts, Hrvoje. What do you think about this 10-cost Newgate and the support around it?
Yeah, as soon as I saw it, like it didn't feel like the right card for this Ace. The first instinct was to go to Marco, because he actually has uses for both the character attach and the leader attach, because he runs the most popularly the animal package with like the 3-cost blocker chopper, which I think is like meshes perfectly with this card. So if you're already establishing like chopper blocker Newgate, this lets you pop out some explode some really big things while staying safe. The problem with that is like this is a 10-cost. And if you are already in a position where you have the blocker chopper and the Newgate, you're probably feeling pretty good even without a card like this. And then the only argument to actually run this is Marco can like cycle in and out the cards he doesn't want to make his life easier. But yeah, that was the first use I had in mind, and the other was in the blue yellow Nami, because she already with access to both starter decks likes the Whitebeard Pirates engine, and then this lets her get the Dawn attach, get a pretty safe blocker, and she does run like several filtering tools to get the brick out of hand if it's presenting a problem. It also kind of covers some of the weaknesses that emerge in late game when she's running the 2-cost each to get those Dawn attached for more aggression. This Newgate automatically attaches, effectively making it a 6-cost 12k blocker. I mean, the ultimate problem is that it's so slow as a card, and that's like the main obstacle. I don't see it very useful in the Red Blue Ace. I could see it useful in other leaders.
At the very least, with the event, it could be 8 cost, but one important thing to point out about that event is that because the effect adds the card from your life and not you take the damage, you don't actually get the draw from your leader effect. So there's a bit of anti-synergy there as well. So maybe not the deck, or maybe not really a card for red blue ace, but see what you're saying, that there are maybe some other decks that could potentially use this. Still though, the trend with OP13 so far is that we've had a very big 10 cost that doesn't do a whole lot on board. There's just a whole lot of interesting cards in the past that exist for this leader that I do think can potentially make the deck very powerful, but it does kind of lean in the aggressive direction currently. We'll see what Bonney has in store for us.
No, there's still the somewhat relevant card in the.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember if it's uncommon or rare. It's an uncommon. It's called Phoenix Pineapple, like almost pineapple. It's a bull 1-cost event, former Wyver Pirates, and it's like the classic main and then counter archetype that we have had recently. On counter, it's plus 3k to leader, and on main, you rest one more Dawn and you bottom deck a 3000 or less power character. So I think this is primarily going to be Marco support, like Red Bull Marco again. But with this ace, it does give another avenue of like potential support for, or potential use for the Luffy Ace Sabo 1-cost, which I could see it sneaking their way into this deck. But there's also just straight synergy with like all the potential power reduction that Ace has from like OP2 Ace and his OP3 support.
Yeah, I can finally get rid of my C-fakes in my collection. Just get rid of those forever.
The card looks so nice though.
It is gorgeous. I can't even deny that. So, let's save Roger for last but not least. Let's jump into the Bonney then. Bonney is a just yellow leader, 5 life, 5k. That's an egghead and a Bonney pirate. And her effect says, on your turn, once per turn, when you play a character with a trigger effect, you may activate this. Give one of your leaders or characters 2 rested Dawn. The first thing I did when I saw this leader was scrounge through every Vegapunk card and see which card was locked to an Egghead leader versus a Vegapunk leader, and I was very, very disappointed. There are a few that are pretty reasonable, but I think the effect of
all the scientists are locked, right?
Yeah. But I think despite that, there's a lot of power in making sure that effectively all your characters with trigger cost 2 less once per turn. There's a lot of like really powerful aggression that you can muster every single turn when you're doing stuff like this, and it makes cards like Cracker giving double attack and some other like really obnoxious like 4 and 5 cost characters much more difficult to deal with. Do you think this card's kind of a gimme, not really that good? What are your guys' thoughts on this, Hrvoje?
I need to check what the OP9 Robin does have a trigger. So there is still like the line of you can take a more aggro approach than the Yellow Kid does, because you can still do the curve of like Hawkins, Robin, all the potential life burners while getting those things in. The downside is that if you are being very aggressive, the actual value of burning opponent's life diminishes. So yeah, it will ultimately, like, first of all, right off the bat, I think this is the hardest leader to make predictions from for in the set, because not only do we have no idea about her support besides one card in the set, there's also the starter deck 29, I think, that's almost certainly designed with this Bonney in mind as well. It's like the Egghead Luffy is going to be the leader. So I'm not one to make bold predictions, but I do think like this is going to be like a modernized Katakuri, in a sense where your deck building is going to be locked into this one specific archetype, instead of it being Big Mom Pirates is going to be primarily Egghead and like good yellow triggers, and you'll just have to aggro it out, because I don't see another way to like utilize this effect. It's pretty much only aggro.
This effect reminds me of Red Rayleigh, so I'm going to have to say that it's going to be broken, just to save face for when we're wrong about if this leader's good or not. But I think that, yeah, we really need to just see the support for this leader, because currently you are kind of forced to just play a bunch of yellow archetypes that have existed in the past, and with a lot of them rotating out in the next couple of sets, I don't think that's what they would really have in mind. So I would imagine that this is just purely going to be up to the support that we get, but you know, the effect on paper is quite solid, just because at least we have a template now that 5 cost or 5,000 power, 5 life leaders that can gain plus 2,000 power out of nowhere have been historically a little bit powerful. So perhaps if we have something like the 4-cost Luffy that can expand your board while also being a trigger card, you can definitely probably do some scary things with this leader.
Thankfully, they printed at least one card that helps this deck become a little bit more aggressive. We got a very expensive reject, but a powerful one nonetheless. In the SR Bonney they printed in OP13. This is a yellow 9-cost 10k that's both Egghead and Body Pirates. On play, if your leader has the Egghead type, this character gains Rush, and then your opponent adds the top of their life card to their hand. And thankfully, this card also has a trigger. If your life is 1 or less, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 7 or less. Despite the fact this card also works in Vegapunk, we can talk about that in a little bit. Does this card being this kind of slightly more expensive dragon in a lot of ways make seem appealing enough to play a deck like Bonney moving forward, or is this card a little bit more underwhelming than you'd like? What are your thoughts on this card, Kai?
I think this is the best SR that they've shown at the very least so far. Like, we lost Reject because it was a no condition. Your opponent has to lose 1 life card, but the condition, I guess, was that the opponent need to be at 1 or less. This card is a 9-cost 10,000 Rush, which is already a very good stat line if we look at things like the Rush Luffy, but it also peels one of the opponent's life immediately, so it's, in a way, kind of a double attack, but it plays around if the opponent's at 1 life, for example. I think that, and also with your leader effect, you're hitting for 7 and 10, which is similar to what Dragon was doing. Like, it's really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think this Bonney like shakes it up mainly because it does appear we are entering an era of like stronger and stronger leader powers on the opponent's turn, and this card kind of lets you. Usually the problem is like not your entire board cannot swing, but if you can just play a character that burns the life when they're like difficult to attack, and then can also swing like 12 because you can just attach to the character, right?
Yep.
And still swing into the face, you're potentially threatening 2 life from like as high as like a 9k base leader. I guarantee taking 1 and then potentially the other. I think this card will be like the what's the word for it? Preying on like all the other leaders in the set basically, because I feel like Bonney's design will be done to counteract pretty much everybody else in the set, especially Roger when we get into it, because she's such a good aggressive piece. Like Reject is it turns its ban fair and square, and this is like even better than Reject because they're not taking damage, so they cannot even get like a useful trigger. They just draw the card. So yeah. I don't think we have had one of those since Bull promo in like OP1 basically.
Am I allowed to talk about Vegapunk now?
Of course, it's time.
Okay, I think this is like the perfect Vegapunk card as well. It's Vegapunk has always had this issue if he plays towards the aggressive variant that he doesn't really have ways to close out the game because his entire board is 6,000 and 7,000 power. And if you play towards the control variant, then it's very difficult to turn the corner because you're just kind of playing like NL forever. And this card being searchable off of things like Lilith and being searchable off of the 1-cost event and also being searchable off of Didashi because it has a trigger makes it very good for a deck like this and really helps him turn the corner because it's 9-cost, meaning that you can also use the last stone to also play defensively in the case of Vegapunk and increase your life, or play a blocker alongside it, for example. I definitely think that, at least currently, this is a better Vegapunk card, although you don't necessarily play as aggressively as Bonney likely would, but I think that the versatility of Vegapunk's effect being able to play aggressively and defensively works quite well with the card as well, because Rush, although you imagine that usually goes to face, can also very easily go into board as well.
No, I just want to say it's a very, very clean substitute and an upgrade to 8-cost kit that Agro Vegapunk decks already ran, because as you said, searchable, and not only does it burn life, it gets to attack, and it's the perfect cost. Like 9-cost is obviously it was designed with Vegapunk in mind.
I was going to briefly complain about the fact you can't put the Bonney back into your life with Vegapunk, but I think it'd be way too obnoxious.
I mean, we haven't even really talked about the trigger. Like, the trigger feels like it's kind of slapped on here just to make sure that your Bonney effect or like the Didashi works, for example. But usually when they do that, it'll just be like trigger, draw 1 card. But no, this trigger is like really powerful.
Is this the most expensive card with like the trigger so far? Like 9 cost? I don't think we had a single one.
It might be.
Because I know there was all in. I think she was 7 cost 7k, something like that. Especially with the effect she has, you wouldn't expect the card at this cost to have a trigger, but it's an influential one. Like resting a 7 cost is it original or is it the base cost?
I think it's
Or sorry, is it original?
I think it's whatever the current cost is. It's not original.
Okay. That's slightly more reasonable. But still, yeah, potential complete blowout because a lot of decks rely on those medium-sized bodies. Important thing I neglected to mention, one of the weaknesses of Vegapunk is similar to Limb, where you have all these 5 costs, but 5 costs are kind of easily dealt with these days. So if your opponent is starving you, they can actually get you. But it's really difficult to start when there's a 9 cost 10k bashing your face. Like, no matter which deck you're playing, even like Blue Purple Luffy, starving against this card is going to be a much bigger challenge.
Very hyped. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more Egghead support as well, and although Bonney can't use the cards that are locked to Vegapunk, Vegapunk can, and Vegapunk can also use whatever the new Egghead cards are. So I'm excited to see, at least a sort of trend that we've seen in this deck, or in this set, is that a lot of the leaders also act as support for other leaders. We saw Marco support in the red support, red blue ace support. We saw some Koala support perhaps coming in the Sabo support, and Luffy exists so far, but we also see Vegapunk support in the Bonney deck so far. So I'm sure that we're going to see a lot of interesting shakeups in the meta with OP13.
At a time for last but not least. So red purple leader, 5 life, 7k power, has the types King of the Pirates and Roger Pirates. The first line of text says, if you have Dawn on your field, give this leader 1 Dawn cards that would be added during your Dawn phase. To kind of summarize that, just because make it kind of convenient. If you have no Dawn in your field, you will just get 2 Dawn regularly. However, if you have 1 or more, when you start your turn, you'll go up to 3. If you're at 1, you go up to 3, and you're forced to attach 1 to your leader. However, if you're at 10, you won't gain any extra Dawn. And the second last part of the text is, while you have 9 or fewer Dawn on the field, this leader has minus 2k power. So this leader's a 5 life, 5k power for the foreseeable future until you're officially at 10 Dawn. I think the downsides are really real. I think the fact that you have to give up cards repeatedly, the fact that you have to give up Dawn repeatedly means you're kind of always half a step behind your opponent until you finally get to the late game. So you need a lot of ramp to kind of help subsidize it. But becoming a 5 life, 7k power leader means you have a ton of cards in the super late game to defend a very, very tanky leader. So just as it is right now, just a red purple 5 life 7k leader that is smaller for the large majority of the part of the game is super duper powerful, because when you need the counter most in the late game, you're still quite big. What are your thoughts on this, Hrvoje?
I think they balanced out the early and mid game decently well with the downside of having to attach the Dawn, because 5 life as a dual color leader without any like real power based downside would have been potentially crazy, but this way you have to invest cards into ramp, and this is something I always make sure to point out in One Piece. Like, every time you invest a card into ramp, it's a card you effectively lost. And we know because of Roger's support, it's like not going to be that dramatic. It's not like the old days where you would play like the OP1 Hawkins or something. But you are going down in card advantage, and unlike Blue Purple Luffy, and I think this is a very important difference, you don't have ways to generate advantage. Like, basically what you draw throughout the game and those 5 lives, those are all the cards you're going to work with. And that does reduce like the potential ceiling of the deck, where you can play for a long-ish game by nature of being a 7k leader, but you also kind of have a limit by which you have to close the game down. It's not like Black Yellow Luffy where you can technically grind because you're like returning your lives and cheating out card advantage. You're just playing a fair game of One Piece with colors of red and purple and without access to Gum Gum Giant. So I think it will be on the easier side in terms of skill requirements to play, but also like powerful by default.
You were also testing this leader, weren't you, a little bit?
Yeah.
And like, how did you feel after trying it a bit?
A lot of those leaders that stick to a curve, it has a predictable and targetable weakness. And that's probably the main way it's going to be exploited in the meta. I think there's like other problems it will have besides the, your 9k and then you fall to 7k, and that 7k turn is where your main threat lies. We'll get into that when we discuss support. But I also think just in general, boards on the other side like grow very quickly these days, like Luffy Taro, 9ko Sanji, the what's his name, 8ko's Dragon in OP12. There's so many ways to like just spawn 2 or 3 bodies of like comparable sizes that can contest only a 7k leader, and it's the 9k barrier that's really going to put this guy on the map. If you cannot maintain your own board, you actually lose cards too fast. The deck becomes very reliant on some of the key pieces, which we will discuss later. How were your thoughts? Because I even saw you uploaded the video and I watched it where you faced with Rayleigh.
I think that the deck is very powerful when it can play on curve, but I do have some concerns for its curve, especially when you're going first. That the first 3 dong turn 2 that Yonas mentioned before, because you have dong on your board and you're gaining dong. Instead of having 3 dong, you only have 2 dong to work with. And currently, at least before OP13, we didn't have any 2-cost ramp cards, meaning that you wouldn't be able to do on this turn. But there is a card that was introduced in OP13 that does ramp you for just 2 dong. Sorry, I forgot to mention this during the podcast, but the 2-cost ramp card that we are referring to on and off is Buggy. Buggy is a 2-cost 2000 2k counter that's Roger Pirates, that on play, if you have a given dong, you can ramp 1 card rested. Essentially, it is the first and only 2-cost ramp card in the game, but it's basically only usable within Roger thanks to the leader lock on the card. The issue that I have so far is that if you don't find this ramp card on the 3 dong turn, then you just can't kind of play the game when you're going first currently with the cards shown right now. So I'm a bit worried that this is the sort of deck that's like very powerful if you can manage to ramp out well, and if you're going second, that's not too hard. But if you miss out on this very important ramp turn when you're going first, it feels like you're playing like several dong behind due to your leader effect.
I think it's somewhat mitigated by also including some of the like generic ramp cards, because the It's to Die For is like probably the best generic way to potentially double ramp going first, because opponents are going to be looking to establish 6k bodies. A lot of the leaders like Red Boys simply for their leader requirement, so you can access that double ramp relatively easily. But the problem is, I think the deck will have to include a lot of like, what's the word for it, safeties in terms of card filtering and making use of all the non-counter that you will have to include in the deck as part of the ramp engine. What are your thoughts on the leader so far, Jonas?
I think it's still very strong. I'm worried just right now that I just don't think this deck could beat 4-cost pudding. I just think like naturally what this deck wants to do is just take all of its life in the early part of the game and really rely on the fact that its leader lets it become a 7k later in the game. And since your leader effect kind of stops you from developing as quickly as you'd like it to, you're also going to be a tad slower than you'd like. So all in all, you just are just going to have to rely on your large hand size to kind of compete against a lot of decks, and your opponents are going to be able to capitalize if they ever draw the card pudding. And that's I guess it's kind of one of the downsides of just becoming a 7k leader ever since BY. But that's kind of where my head's at in terms of, I think this deck is going to struggle a lot in terms of decks that can really manipulate or mess with its hand.
I think, I mean, I did put out a video on this leader, kind of first impression, like deck list and thoughts with the current support, and we have seen a lot of support, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more in detail later on. But I realized something about the leader, a bit vulnerable if your top end, especially the 10-cost Goldie Roger, which this deck kind of feels like it's built around, gets removed from the board. Yeah, let's talk about this character first, and then talk about some of the other support, because it seems like a lot of the deck kind of revolves around this. So it's a 10-cost 13,000 character, purple, Goldie Roger, Pirate King, and Roger Pirates, which makes it so that your leader and your own characters that are not Roger Pirates are negated. Then on play, you return 3 dong, minus 3 dong, and your leader gains plus 2,000 power until the opponent's next end phase, and the opponent's characters all gain minus 2,000 power as well until the opponent's next end phase. So effectively makes your leader, in this case, 9,000 power and the opponent's board at minus 2,000 power, which, pseudo 11,000 power leader. If this card is removed, you go back to 7k on that turn, and next turn you're at 9 dong, meaning that you can't go up to 7,000 power the turn after that. So I'm very worried that in the face of something like a red rock or any sort of black deck that can just remove this character, playing this Roger at a poor timing can really punish you, because not only do you go to 7k, but you go to 5k the turn after that. Any thoughts on this card, maybe, Yonas?
I guess before I talk about my thoughts on the card, you can just like ramp with some of the other ramp that's been spoiled so far, and like that turn post 10 drop to kind of offset it, right? You get to become a 7k leader, but you can't just 10 chain the 10 drop. So there is like some ways to make sure you just don't die a lot of the time when that happens. But yeah, I do think this card's quite fragile. Additionally, they printed one card to kind of help with offsetting that. We can talk about that in a little bit. But in general, this card is heavy-handed in terms of how it's templated, but I really like how precautious they were with printing a card like this that made the major leaders so big compared to the rest of your opponent's board. The fact that this card can't be chained for the most part because of the Dawn -3 condition, the fact that you have to negate leader effect means that some leaders that might be able to like ramp with their leader effect, like red purple Luffy or purple Luffy, can't chain this card back to back, unfortunately. And additionally, negating all the effects of your character without Roger Pirates also means like now like your cards that ramp when they attack are no longer going to be good anymore as well. So I do think that all these precautions are annoying as a deck builder, but I do think these are kind of necessary when you're kind of chaining them. My silly brain wants to go to ways to do it anyways, and the ways I was thinking about it first were just Iceberg and Kaido, because they both have access to stages that allow you to ramp back to back between Gaia Law Company and Onigashima Island. So I'm just curious if like we can make that happen, like finding a deck that can chain them back to back, and that's something that I really want to explore. I think this card has a lot of safety measures, probably for good reason, and despite the fact I think this card's still very, very powerful.
I'm definitely on the side that I appreciate the careful design, but I do think it's kind of a very telegraphed in a sense that you're never going to be able to play this card. It's kind of like Gear 5 in the sense that the turn you play this, you're committing that the game ends like near immediately. Like not this turn, but once you play it, like your leader is falling down in power the turn after. Talking specifically about Goldie Roger, all the survival tools you can use to survive that could be used without playing the card in the first place. So it's pretty much a full-on committal that you're going to be ending the game soon, and that's the part I don't really like, because it makes for a lot of anti-synergy with engine pieces you would otherwise want to run. So like 8-cost Katakuri loses all the value in this deck because at some point he gets negated. 9-cost Newgate, you can only play the copies that you see before the Roger, like keep chaining them, but once you play Roger, any copies you draw end up dead. You are limited to running specifically Roger Pirate support that can like help filter out hand or set up blockers later because it negates everything else. You cannot save your Bonkley for opportune times because it's going to be negated, so it doesn't get to copy like opponent's 10-cost Buggy or Teach or whatever. And I agree with the really important point Kai made. If this card gets removed, you are probably in a world of pain as Gold Roger, I already mentioned, but I do think the deck is going to have a lot of problems with removal just because it plays a slower game, which makes it easier to respond to because it's lower power, lower cost. And the decks that can just shut it down in the early phase, it kind of won't matter how big the hand is if there's like a Kuzan, Brook, Rebecca, or whatever ready to take out whatever you play. Or even if you're just playing Teach, or there's a 10-cost Buggy coming down. It feels like there's a lot of answers ready for specifically this deck and this card already in the meta, and one of them is also the Rush Bomb that we mentioned earlier, where she burns the life and goes in without the 2k power reduction anyways.
The thing that I've been thinking about with this leader is that if you play this the turn before you decide to go for lethal, it's very powerful because it basically makes it so it's impossible for the opponent to go for lethal, for save for very specific cases. The thing that I was thinking about for this deck after playing the deck a little bit was that you really don't want to play this card until you want to end the game. So what you likely would want to do with this leader, at least with the current support shown so far, would probably be to just play things like the 9-cost Newgate, like the 10-cost Shanks, to kind of give yourself 8,000 power ahead of time, or pseudo 9,000 power ahead of time, or kind of pseudo 8,000 power if you were to play Shanks, and play through that until you're confident in your ability to end the game the next turn. So you'd likely maybe only run this card at 1 to 2 copies with the current style, but that is given the fact that we haven't seen any sorts of ways to ramp on the same turn to really ensure that you could play 2 of these back to back.
I feel like Yonas is going to refute us, and he's going to mention the 8-cost Rayleigh.
Oh, we can talk about that card. I think that card does help a lot in terms of dealing with your opponent's setup, but I don't think it solves all of the issues that you guys mentioned, so I think that's also quite valid. But let's jump into that guy. I'm trying to pull him up now. So one of the SRs in OP13 is the new Rayleigh. It's an 8-cost 9k / as a Roger Pirate that has Rush. And on play, if you have any given Dawn, like the one that you're mandatory to have with your leader, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, and then at the end of your turn, add 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck is active. Ideal transition card to go from like your 9 Dawn turn to your 10 Dawn turn, because with your when you're playing this deck at the very least, on your 9 Dawn turn you only have 8 Dawn, so now you get to play this 8/9 rush that helps you bully board, and also helps you fight for board. Unfortunately, you have to ramp at the end of the turn, so you don't get to become a 7k for that particular combat. But this card is still pretty convenient in terms of trying to just fight for board in a lot of these spots.
Importantly, one thing to note about just Roger's leader effect in general is that on this key 9-dong turn, if you were not able to play this Rayleigh, for example, then the next turn, although you'd be at 10 dong, you would have to attach 1 to your leader, meaning you'd only have 9 dong to play with. So if you can manage to go from Rayleigh into Roger, then it's very powerful. I think that Rayleigh is just one of the strongest purple cards that they've ever printed, which is saying something for purple. I think that just again, kind of harping back to one of the points that I made before, that like if you don't draw the cards that you want to see on curve, then this leader can start to struggle a lot playing off of curve.
We'll just always draw the buggy trust.
I rate Rayleigh, but I rate Rayleigh because in my head I compare it with a really good purple card we just got, which is Katakuri. And I think Katakuri is a better card, to be fair, because he's like defensively geared and he can still attack while saving you cards each turn, which is usually better than getting the extra attack in right now. And they both ramp. For Roger specifically, Rayleigh is better, but it doesn't mean it cannot be played in other decks like Purple Luffy, maybe. He's gonna have more trouble like having a Dawn attached to enable the effect on the ramp. But yeah, the fact that it's comparable to the best purple character right now, arguably, is a good enough makes a good enough case to consider Rayleigh a key piece for Roger. But yeah, if I could, I would run Katakuri's. I think just because being able to like generate 3 cards on defense through the 3 blocks is always higher value.
You still can technically. It is a bit awkward once you play that Roger, but if you play kind of towards that game plan where you only play Roger on the final turn, then although you don't get the restand effect from the Katakuri, the value before that may be relevant. There is another leader though that does use that Rayleigh very well, and that is Red Purple Luffy. Yeah, Red Purple Luffy. Red Purple Luffy, when you get to 8 dong active, you can just gain 1 extra dong active. So you always, if you have enough dong to play the Akast Rayleigh, you have enough dong to attach a dong to your leader. And Red Purple Luffy is a deck that has historically struggled to deal with the opponent's lower cost blockers. So having an effect like this, which is almost a strict upgrade over some of the other things that exist, like the 9-cost Luffy, although it doesn't give you a card draw, lets you affect the board and be more aggressive in these different ways. Being able to use things like the 8-cost Dragon and 9-cost or 8-cost Rayleigh in Red Purple Luffy, I think can be quite relevant as well. Plus, he doesn't have the restriction of needing to be locked to Roger needing to be locked to the Roger Pirates, and he can use Gum Gum Giant. So another leader that can use this card very well, I think.
Are there any? So there's a couple other cards that they spoiled, and they kind of have the same template about if they have an extra Dawn on your leader, you get to ramp and have some extra effects. Are there any ones you guys want to talk about in particular that kind of seem particularly game changing? is just enough consistency to make this deck good, or is there anything you guys want to talk about in specific with us?
For me, I can't say any specific cards stuck out. Like it's a repeating template, and I think the one that 6 cost 7k that draws 2, trashes 1 is the best one, because it lets you deal with those bricks and like dig for ideally as many 9 cost new gates, because I really do think that it is like the way I imagine the optimal play pattern in the deck, looking like it's like chain new gates for as long as you can to be 9k, and then you drop the Roger as your last 9k turn, and then use all the accumulated big bodies to finish the game. So anything that like helps you search for dig for the unsearchable cards because they're not Roger pirates, I do value higher. But yeah, it's kind of a repeating template. Like the 5 cost 6k blocker, I think it's Odin. Gaban is the draw, and Odin is the blocker. Those are the two standouts. Yeah, I don't know. Buggy is like a 2k, so between being ramp and a 2k, he's just good. Shanks is just a searcher. He doesn't have anything extra, right? I'm generally not even a fan of the design for Roger already feeling so boxed in, where you're basically getting a starter deck within the set for which cards you have to include. But that has been like a decently common thing in One Piece for a while now, so it makes no sense to complain now.
Maybe overly negative on the leader as a whole, maybe, but I do think that it is very powerful. I think that with the right deck list as well as support, I think that it'll be very powerful. It's just I can't shake the fact that it's kind of just a fancy red shanks.
The audacity, but I respect it. You're not wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I also get, like, if we're kind of talking about some, like, other comparisons, I get some sorts of Black Yellow Koala vibes, where because this is the first time we're seeing purple Roger Pirates, this the cards that we have right now are, like, in a way, they work together in that they have an effect and also ramp you a card. But one of the other issues that cards like this have is that the actual other effect isn't very relevant. It's not very powerful. And then in the grand scheme of the meta where people have like 50 really strong cards, if you're running like 20 really strong cards and 30 means to get to them, then like unless you're green purple Luffy, that doesn't always work. Actually, one thing that I do want to point out, because maybe not everyone has updated information, there was a card that they showed just yesterday as of recording this card, which is I think in English called like Go to the Top of the Mountain. In Japanese it sounds a little bit cooler, Chotte Madetikoi, which on main, if you were to rest 3 more dong, then if you have a given dong, then you can KO one of the opponent's character's original power 4,000 or less and 3,000 or less. And on counter, this card is give your leader plus 3,000 power for the battle. There was a typo on this card that they revealed yesterday, and it said turn, and people freaked out that this is going to be the end of the One Piece card game. But there was a correction. This is supposed to be plus 8,000 for the battle. I think that given that fact, it's a fairly mediocre card because it doesn't even work with power reduction, and the plus 8,000 can't go to your characters. So just for people who maybe didn't see, or maybe saw the first card but didn't see the update, now you know why.
I actually kind of like the card, because it's similar to Gear 2 in a sense where usually my problem with cards like this, for example, Elephant Gatling is the green version, somewhat similar to this in green purple. We don't have Deadman's Game yet, and it cannot protect characters. But if you're playing a deck with characters big enough that protecting characters doesn't matter, then you're only looking at like the guard point on leader or the other useful effect. And here the other useful effect, it cannot extend its reach like the OP3 Firefist could, but it can deal with like pesky bodies that like Rayleigh is trying to set up to chip away at your hand size and kill you fast. Maybe deal with some blockers. So I think there's generally not that much downside to including this card in the deck. So I kind of like it. Like I wouldn't discredit it this early.
Yeah, I think the problem with this card is almost entirely dependent on how powerful Rayleigh and like the 4-cost Luffy engine becomes in the OP13 metagame, just because of how well it lines up against the OP12 Luffy, the one that puts in another 3k body. So all in all, everyone's favorite leaders are still different, right? I'm still a huge fan of the Red Green Luffy leader. I imagine, Kai, your favorite leader right now is Ace.
Yep.
Yep.
I have the proxy right here.
He's ready. And Hrvoje, have your thoughts changed?
I don't know. I'm still hyped for Sabo. Like I'll crack that walnut when we get there, though.
We'll be fighting for pride to see who ends up choosing the best leader in the current or in the future OP13 metagame.
I would not bet on myself.
I also would probably bet on the leader that has not been spoiled yet, but we can talk about that one when we get more cards. But otherwise, it was really fun going through all these cards. I think OP13 is going to be a very different metagame to what we've been seeing so far. And I do think there might be some more Roger support that might make the deck a little bit more powerful than what we've seen quite so far. But fingers crossed on that one. I just want to play Roger and be happy about it, really. But
I think the two biggest reveals, okay, aside from the leader, which shall not be named, the reveals we can anticipate the most are the remaining 2 secret rares, because this is the first set with 3 secret rares, and because of the theme, it should be Luffy and Ace that get their own secret rares. So I imagine some really good support for their respective leaders will emerge there.
Thank you for joining us for episode 8 of I forget the name of the podcast. What in the world?
Oh, Blue. No.
Oh, Blue. Jesus Christ. That's what happens when we talk for an hour and a half. Anyways, thank you for joining us of the All Blue, where we talked a lot about the preliminary spoilers for OP13. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. The Spotify will be out within the next week once we post the rest of the videos. I have episode 8 online, or episode 6 online, but we'll try to get the rest of them this week. Thank you, Kai and Hrvoje, for joining me today, and I hopefully will see you guys soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.